Praising in the wait is a concept that challenges our natural instincts. It's easy to praise when things are moving, when doors are opening, when the breakthrough has already come. But praising in the wait, when we're standing in the middle of uncertainty, when the promise is not yet visible, when it feels like we're walking in circles, that's where the true power lies. Praising in the wait requires a level of faith and trust that goes beyond circumstance, beyond timing, beyond the limitations of what we can see with our eyes. To praise in the wait is to acknowledge God's goodness even when his promises haven't fully materialized. It's to recognize that he is still worthy of our worship, that he is still faithful, even when the situation doesn't look like it's progressing in the way we expect. This kind of praise isn't based on our feelings or on what's happening around us. It's based on the unshakable truth that God is good, he is working, and he is always with us, no matter how long the wait. The waiting period is often the hardest part of any journey. It can feel like a limbo, like we're stuck between where we were and where we want to go. The temptation is to grow frustrated, to doubt, or to give up. But praising in the wait helps us to shift our focus from the frustration of the delay to the faithfulness of the one who is orchestrating our lives. When we praise in the wait, we're not ignoring the struggle or pretending that everything is fine. We are simply choosing to magnify God above our circumstances. It's a conscious decision to say, I will still honor you, God, because I know you're working behind the scenes. Praise during the waiting period also serves as a powerful reminder of who God is. When we're in the middle of uncertainty, it's easy to forget that he is faithful, that he is a provider, that he is a healer, that he is a promise keeper. Praising in the wait forces us to declare these truths over our lives, even when we can't yet see the outcome. This is an act of spiritual resistance, a way to reject the lies that try to convince us that God has forgotten us or that he is not listening to our prayers. Praising during the wait strengthens our spiritual foundation and prepares our hearts for the next step. In the waiting, we are also being prepared for the promise. The waiting period is not a waste of time. It's a season of preparation, refinement, and growth. When we praise in the wait, we align ourselves with God's plan, and we allow him to work in us as he prepares us for the blessing ahead. Waiting teaches us patience, perseverance, and trust. It develops a deeper level of character in us and builds a foundation that will support the promises we're about to receive. Praising in this season acknowledges that the delay is not a denial, but a divine part of the process that will make us ready for what's coming next. Praising in the wait also shifts our perspective. It allows us to see that the delay is not a punishment, but an opportunity. The waiting period is where God can speak to us most profoundly. When we're not distracted by the urgency of the breakthrough, we're more open to hear God's voice, more receptive to his guidance. Praise during the wait turns our eyes away from what we lack and refocuses them on what we already have, his presence, his peace, and his promises. It turns the waiting from a passive experience into an active one where we are engaged with God in a deep personal way. Sometimes praising in the wait is the only thing we can do. When everything else seems uncertain, when we feel like we have no control over the situation, praise becomes our declaration of trust. It's a way to actively put our faith into action, to declare that no matter what, God is still God, and he is still worthy of our praise. Praise in the waiting moment becomes a form of spiritual warfare. It quiets the voice of doubt, it rebukes the voice of fear, and it strengthens the spirit. In some seasons, the waiting is long, and it's difficult to see any progress. But praising during this time helps us to endure, knowing that the waiting is not pointless. Every moment of praise, even when it feels like it's falling into silence, is a step forward. It's a seed being planted that will grow into something beautiful. Each praise is a part of the process of God preparing us for what's to come. It's a part of us learning to rely on him, not just for the promises, but for his presence in the waiting. When we praise in the wait, we are participating in something much larger than ourselves. Our praise becomes a witness to others. It's a testimony of faith that shows the world that our trust in God is not dependent on the outward signs of success or the fulfillment of our desires. It's a testimony that God is enough and his presence is enough, even before the promise is realized. Through our praise, we become living examples of the power of faith in action, showing others that even when the promise hasn't arrived, God is still worthy of all the honor and glory. Doubt is a powerful force, one that can creep into our hearts and minds when we least expect it. It often comes in the form of questions, uncertainties, or fears that challenge the very core of our faith. Doubts may arise when we're facing challenges that seem insurmountable or when the promises of God seem far away. It's easy to start questioning ourselves, wondering if we heard God correctly, if the dream is still possible, or if we are worthy of what He has promised. Doubt, when left unchecked, can paralyze us, slow our progress, and shake our confidence in the path ahead. But overcoming doubts is not about eliminating every question or every fear we may have. It's about learning how to respond to those doubts in a way that strengthens our faith and trust in God. Doubt itself is not a sin, it's a natural part of the human experience. It's how we handle doubt that determines whether it becomes an obstacle or an opportunity for growth. When we face doubts, we are given a chance to strengthen our trust in God, to reaffirm the truth of His promises, and to choose faith over fear. One of the first steps in overcoming doubt is to confront it head on. Often we try to avoid doubt or pretend it doesn't exist, but this only allows it to fester and grow. The moment we acknowledge our doubts, we take away their power. It's okay to admit that we're struggling, that we're uncertain, or that we're afraid. God knows our hearts, He knows our struggles, and He's not surprised by our doubts. In fact, He invites us to bring them to Him, to lay them at His feet and trust that He will help us work through them. In confronting doubt, we also need to remind ourselves of the truth that God is faithful, that He has never failed, and that His promises are sure. Doubt thrives in an environment of forgetfulness, where we lose sight of God's past faithfulness and the many times He has come through for us before. When we face doubts, we must choose to remember the victories, the moments where God showed up, where He answered our prayers, and where His provision was evident. The more we recall God's faithfulness, the less power doubt has over us. Doubt begins to lose its grip when we fill our hearts and minds with the truths of who God is and what He has already done. Another way to overcome doubt is to look beyond our own understanding. Doubt often arises when we rely too heavily on our limited perspective. When we try to make sense of everything based on what we can see, feel, and understand, we often miss the bigger picture. God sees what we cannot see, and His plans are beyond our comprehension. Trusting God means recognizing that He is in control, even when we can't see how things will work out. It's about surrendering our need for certainty and allowing God to work in His perfect timing, in His perfect way. Overcoming doubt requires us to let go of the need to have everything figured out and embrace the peace that comes from trusting in God's sovereignty. We must also be careful about the voices we listen to when doubts arise. Doubt can often be magnified when we allow negative thoughts, outside opinions, or past failures to speak louder than the truth of God's word. The enemy of our soul delights in whispering lies into our ears, telling us that we're not good enough, that we're too far gone, or that God won't come through this time. But we have to be intentional about choosing which voice we listen to. God's voice is one of love, hope, and encouragement. His word is filled with promises of His faithfulness, His provision, and His unending love. When we choose to listen to God's voice above all others, doubt begins to lose its power. Overcoming doubt also involves action. Faith is not just about what we believe, it's about what we do with what we believe. Doubt can cause us to hesitate, to procrastinate, or to retreat, but faith calls us to move forward. Even when we don't have all the answers, even when the path is unclear, faith takes steps. Trusting in God means moving forward, even when our feelings are uncertain or our circumstances seem unfavorable. Action in the face of doubt is an expression of confidence that God will meet us where we are and guide us along the way. The more we step out in faith, the more we see that God is faithful to His word, and the more our doubts are replaced with confidence. In addition, overcoming doubt requires a deep sense of community. We were never meant to walk this journey alone. Doubt can isolate us, make us feel as though we're the only ones struggling. But when we surround ourselves with others who are also walking by faith, we gain strength and encouragement. Sharing our doubts and fears with trusted friends and mentors opens the door for support, prayer, and perspective. Others can help us see things from a different angle, remind us of God's promises, and pray for strength when we feel weak. The community of believers serves as a powerful source of hope and encouragement in moments of doubt. Finally, overcoming doubt is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Just like faith is a muscle that grows with use, so is our ability to overcome doubt. Each time we face doubt and choose to trust God, we build our spiritual strength. Each time we confront our doubts, take them to God, and lean on His truth, we become more confident in His faithfulness. The more we overcome doubt, The more we recognize that our faith isn't based on our circumstances or our feelings, but on the unshakable truth of God's word. The process of overcoming doubt transforms us, shaping us into stronger, more resilient believers who can stand firm in the face of uncertainty. Gratitude is not just an afterthought, it is the very foundation upon which everything else in our lives is built. Think about it for a moment. When we are truly grateful, we shift our focus from what we lack to what we have. Gratitude changes the way we view our circumstances, our relationships, and our future. It moves us from a place of complaining to a place of contentment, from despair to hope, from fear to faith. At its core, gratitude is the belief that everything we have, everything we are, and everything we experience is a gift. It acknowledges the blessings that have already been given, even when we're waiting for more to come. But this gratitude isn't always easy. It's one thing to thank God when things are going well, when everything is falling into place. But when life throws us curveballs, when we're standing in the middle of a storm, that's when gratitude truly matters. Gratitude as a foundation doesn't mean we ignore our struggles or pretend everything is perfect. It means that even in the midst of hardship, we choose to recognize the things we can be thankful for. It means being able to look at a difficult situation and find a reason to praise, even when it feels like there's nothing to praise. The act of giving thanks is an act of faith, a declaration that despite the challenges, we trust that there is purpose in the process. When gratitude is our foundation, it becomes a lens through which we see the world. We start to notice the small blessings, the way the sun rises every morning, the laughter of a friend, the love of a family member, the fact that we woke up to another day. These may seem like small things, but when we practice gratitude, these moments become monumental. They are the building blocks that form the life we're creating. Gratitude is also a force of transformation. It can take a situation that seems impossible and shift our perspective in a way that opens our eyes to new possibilities. It turns what might feel like a setback into an opportunity for growth. It transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. When we build our lives on gratitude, we start to notice how much we already have, and in that recognition, our faith deepens. When we are grounded in gratitude, we are less likely to be shaken by the inevitable storms of life. Gratitude strengthens our hearts, fortifies our spirits, and anchors us when we feel like we might drift away. It's a reminder that no matter how difficult things may seem, there's always something worth thanking God for. And when we express that gratitude, we tap into a deeper well of peace, hope, and joy that sustains us through any challenge. Gratitude doesn't only change our perception of our current situation, it also impacts how we approach the future. When we are thankful for where we are, it prepares us to handle where we're going. Gratitude opens doors to more blessings because it shows that we can be trusted with more. When God sees that we can be thankful with little, He knows that we will be thankful with much. Gratitude makes us ready, not just for what we have, but for what's coming next. Ultimately, gratitude as a foundation is not a fleeting emotion, but something that only happens when things go our way. It's a way of life. It's a choice we make every day to recognize and appreciate what we've been given, and it becomes the very bedrock of everything that follows. Faith before the evidence is the kind of belief that defies logic, transcends what we can see, and leans into what we can't yet understand. It's the ability to trust in something beyond our immediate circumstances, to believe in what seems impossible, to walk in a direction when all the signs suggest we're walking into the unknown. This type of faith is not about seeing to believe, it's about believing before we see. The world often teaches us that faith requires proof. If we can't see it, touch it, or measure it, then how can we believe in it? But true faith doesn't rely on visible evidence. In fact, true faith is most powerful when there is no tangible proof to hold on to. It's the trust that even in the absence of visible results, God is working, moving, and fulfilling His promises. It's the assurance that what's promised will come to pass, even if it seems like the waiting is endless. Faith before the evidence is the trust that holds on to the word God has spoken, even when there are no outward signs to confirm it. It's the belief in the unseen that fuels our actions. It's the knowing that even though things don't look like they're going according to plan, God has a plan and His timing is perfect. Faith doesn't require evidence because it believes the promise will manifest in its own time, regardless of current circumstances. One of the clearest examples of faith before the evidence is found in the stories of people in the Bible. Take Abraham, for instance. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, but at the time, Abraham was well beyond the age of having children. His wife Sarah was barren. There was no evidence of the promise being true. Yet Abraham believed. He believed God when he said, I will make you the father of many nations, and Abraham's faith carried him even when his situation said otherwise. The evidence hadn't arrived yet, but his faith led the way. This kind of faith is about action, even in the face of uncertainty. It's the faith that starts the journey before the map is fully revealed. It's the belief that God is at work behind the scenes, even when the path is unclear. It's the faith that allows us to keep walking forward, not because we see the finish line, but because we trust the one who has already mapped it out. The evidence might not show up in the form we expect, but the foundation of our faith tells us that God's promises are true, regardless of our understanding of how or when they'll unfold. Faith before the evidence doesn't mean there's no struggle, no moments of doubt, or no frustration in the waiting. It's not about denying the reality of the situation. It's about choosing to focus on the reality of God's word. It's about acknowledging the fears, the questions, the what ifs, and then choosing to stand firm in what God has already declared. We may not always feel like we're moving toward the promise, but faith tells us that the progress is still happening even when we can't see it. Just because we can't see the evidence doesn't mean the promise isn't being worked out in our lives. This faith is active. It's not passive waiting. It's not about sitting still and hoping things will magically happen. Faith before the evidence is about continuing to live with purpose, to move forward with confidence, to keep speaking life over your situation, even when the circumstances seem bleak. It's believing in the breakthrough, even when it feels miles away. It's taking the next step, even when you don't have the whole plan in front of you. Faith before the evidence is a demonstration of trust. It's saying, I know who God is. I know what he has promised. And I will trust in his goodness and his timing. It's knowing that while you may not see the immediate results, that doesn't negate the promise. God doesn't need our permission to work. He's working all the time, even when we can't see the results. When we have faith before the evidence, we are aligning ourselves with the truth that God is bigger than our understanding, greater than our doubts, and more powerful than the limitations of what we can physically see. Transformation through trust is a process that moves us from where we are to where we are meant to be. Trust is not just a feeling, it is the action that catalyzes change, the very ingredient that fuels growth. When we trust, we surrender. We let go of control and give God permission to work in ways that we may not fully understand. This surrender, however, is not a sign of weakness. It's a powerful act of faith that allows God to shape us into who we are meant to be. Trust is the bedrock of every meaningful transformation. Think about how trust operates in relationships. When you trust someone, you allow them to influence you, to speak into your life, to shape your decisions. The same is true with God. When we place our trust in him, we are allowing him to mold our hearts, to refine our character, and to direct our paths. Trust opens the door for transformation to occur because it is through trust that we give God access to the deepest parts of who we are. In our journey of transformation, trust often requires us to step into the unknown. It's trusting God when we don't have all the answers, when the road ahead looks uncertain. Trust is the act of walking forward, even when the path is unclear, knowing that God is leading us. It is a willingness to believe that he sees what we cannot, that his plan is bigger than our fears, and that he is capable of making us into something better than we could ever imagine on our own. When we trust, we stop trying to force outcomes and start allowing ourselves to be shaped by the process. The transformation is not about reaching a final destination, it's about how we are changed in the process of getting there. Trusting God doesn't mean things will always be easy or smooth, but it does mean that we are open to his work in our lives, even in the challenges. Trust allows us to see struggles as opportunities for growth, obstacles as lessons, and delays as divine timing. The act of trusting God often means letting go of our need for control. We live in a world that values self-sufficiency and independence, but true transformation requires us to release our tight grip on our own plans and trust in God's bigger vision. The more we trust, the more we allow God to take the lead in our lives. The more we trust, the more we begin to see ourselves differently, not defined by our mistakes, our past, or our limitations, but defined by God's purpose for us. Trust also transforms our perspective. When we trust God, we start to view the world through his eyes. We begin to understand that every situation, every relationship, every challenge is a part of a larger picture. Trust opens our hearts to see the good in every circumstance, even when things don't make sense. It allows us to believe that God is working behind the scenes for our good, even in moments when we can't trace his hand. This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight, but it is a natural result of leaning into trust. The more we trust, the more our hearts align with God's truth. This transformation through trust is not just about our external circumstances changing, it's about who we become in the process. Trust refines our character. It builds our patience, strengthens our resilience, and deepens our humility. When we trust God, we are transformed into people who can endure hardships with grace, who can love others more deeply, and who can face uncertainty with courage. Trust brings out the best in us because it opens us up to God's power, allowing us to be reshaped into the image He has always intended for us. As we continue to trust, we begin to experience peace in the midst of chaos. Trust doesn't mean we will never feel anxious or worried, but it does mean that in the moments when we are uncertain, we can anchor ourselves in the trust that God is in control. Trust is the peace that comes from knowing that even when things are falling apart around us, God is still working things together for our good. It's the assurance that He has a plan even when we can't see it. Transformation through trust is not a one-time event, it's an ongoing journey. Trusting God is not something we do once and then move on. It's a daily decision to surrender to His will, to yield to His guidance, and to allow Him to continue His work in us. The more we trust, the more we are changed, the more we grow, and the more we reflect His image. This trust-based transformation is a lifelong process, one that molds us into individuals who are more like Christ and more aligned with God's purpose for our lives.